Hey guys, Andy here with Precision, and today we've got the 17 HMR sitting up here. This is a Savage 93 R17. I already had a Gamo scope that I put on there that, in all honesty, is kind of the reason for today's video. I'm not overly happy with it. It gets the job done, yes, but there's definitely some upgrades. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through and actually replace this scope today. I'm going to show you guys kind of step by step how we do that and kind of set ourselves up for success with this new scope we're going to put in. So stick around. All right guys, so again, this is our 93 R17. Excellent gun, super straight shooter. The problem is that this scope is not meant for much more than being able to say that it's a scope. So it's a 3-9 40mm objective. It gets the job done, but again, it's a very basic duplex. The image quality is less than ideal, we'll put it that way. Anyway, first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna take this scope off, and then we can go ahead and get the gun leveled. So let's get the scope off first. So all we're gonna do is remove these, and this whole scope is going away. Now this is a 1-inch tube. The scope that we're replacing it with is a 30mm tube, so these rings are essentially useless at this point. So I'm just gonna go ahead and leave them on the scope. Now all I'm gonna do is, I'm not even going to torque these down, I'm just going to snug them up just that we don't lose the screws. Now this gun, actually the scope that we're starting with, I've actually already taken it out, but we had it mounted on this. Now this was actually a scope that I had on one of my ARs. I'm going to completely redo that AR. There's absolutely no reason to keep this scope because it's not going to be used. Now if this had fit, I would absolutely love to use this. However, as you guys can see, this mount is not able to span both of these lugs on the action. So what we're going to do is essentially get rid of this, and I was able to pick up a set of Vortex rings. These are the Pro Series low height 30mm tube. I want to say they were 70, 80 bucks, something like that at Cabela's. So just went down and picked these up. We're also going to be mounting this scope. So hopefully you guys can see that. This is a Vortex Strike Eagle 3-18 by 44mm objective. I do have a sunshade on here and flip caps. So that's really, the scope actually ends right about here if you guys can't see that. The rest of this is just sunshade. Really nice scope. Like I said, I've used it on my AR quite a bit and just decided to redo the AR. So illuminated, has parallax adjustments, windage and elevation of course. Nice and bright. Anyway, what we're going to do is we're going to just verify first and foremost that this gun is level before we actually try to attach this. In order to do that, we have a set of Wheeler scope leveling system. So first thing we're going to do is try to get this scope, or this rifle here, it's actually magnetized in there real nice. All I'm going to do is try to get it level front to back, at least relatively level. Doesn't have to be perfect, and that's just about as perfect as it's going to get, I believe. But the primary thing that we want to look for is side to side. Now the reason for that is because we want the reticle to be plumb and true to the actual bore of the rifle. So we're going to line up the bubble there, clamp this thing down so it's not going to move anywhere. So there's probably other ways to clamp this in here. I'm just using obviously my Upton gun vise, Ultra gun vise, and seems to work out really well. So we're pretty level there. We're going to leave this on there. Now what I'm doing is, because there really isn't any flat spot across this action or the entire gun really, other than right on these lugs. So I'm using that kind of as my reference surface. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take this piece, which clamps onto the barrel. You guys can see there's a couple adjustments. Not only are we able to kind of twist this on the barrel as we set it, but we can fine tune it so that these bubbles both match between our reference level and our barrel level. So what I got to do is loosen this up so that the bottom half here can come down or swing out of the way at least. Going to loosen this up a little bit more. Now when we do this, we're not trying to really bear down on anything or really crank it down, add a ton of torque. All we're really trying to do is just keep it in place. Now even if our original level back here is not perfectly level, the primary thing that we want to do is verify that this bubble and the bubble back on the lug is the same. So now that this is kind of clamped down, what I can do is I can adjust this screw here, and that is kind of the fine adjustment in order to make everything lined up just the way that we want it. Now the reason that we need this level here is because we're eventually going to remove that one in order to obviously put the rings on. So we need to obviously clamp everything down, make sure it's not going to go anywhere, and now I can see that my levels, the bubbles in both levels, are identical. So now what we can do is actually remove this one, just set it off to the side for the time being, and then we can take our rings here. You guys can see each one of these has, it's obviously 4 screws total per cap. So I'm just going to go ahead and remove those screws. Now Vortex is really nice in the fact that it comes with all the tools you actually need. Except, with that being said, these are 18 inch-pounds. They're torque spec. They actually have it laser engraved on the cap. This is not a precision instrument by any means, so I'm going to have to get another tip, a T25, to actually fit into my torque wrench. First thing I'm going to do, loosen all these up. Alright guys, so again, we're just verifying that everything is still level, so we're good there. So we're going to go and pull that off. Now these rings, what we're going to do is we're just going to set the bottoms first. So all I'm going to do is loosen these up just a little bit here. Now there really isn't any front or back to these. They're symmetrical. So what we can do is just set that on there. Now in the bottom of these, they do have a recoil lug. Hopefully you guys can see that. All we're going to do is set that in, obviously one into each one of these. Rock it down onto there. Sits nice and straight. And all we're going to do is just snug it down for the time being, just to hold it in place. Now obviously I'll come back through, make sure that everything is torqued properly. You don't want to just kind of use your precision elbow. You want to properly torque these down, and the reason for that is because if they're not, if they're too loose, obviously the whole scope can lose zero pretty easily. If everything is too tight, you actually run the risk of deforming the scope on the actual rings themselves, where it clamps onto the scope with the between the top and the bottom cap. You actually run the risk of everything kind of crimping down just a little bit one way or another, and that obviously throws off all your measurements, what each of your clicks means, how easily the springs and gears and everything work inside the actual tube itself. So again, just keep that in mind. It is pretty critical that everything is set accurately. So Vortex is calling for 30 inch-pounds to attach the rings to the lug, so we're going to go ahead and set that before we ever try to put the scope into the rings themselves. So I've got my torque wrench here. I've already got that set to 30, so once it beeps, I know I'm good. So I'll be honest guys too, if you've never used a torque wrench or a torque driver like this, you'd really be surprised how much 30 inch-pounds actually is. It doesn't sound like a whole lot, but before I'd actually used one of these, if I really didn't know where 30 is, I probably would have stopped a lot sooner than this. So this one is actually starting to beep solid around 28.5, 29, so kind of keep that in mind. The other thing that I would do, I don't use this to, obviously, I don't use it as an actual screwdriver. This is just to set the torque. So now that we have those set, what we can do is we can actually take the scope. I got the lowest. I might have to go up to medium. We're going to find out here. But I think, yep, that's going to work out real nice. So just to give you guys an idea of how close this actually is, and the fact that it's actually a good thing, is you only really want to be about 3 millimeters or so above the scope. Now these are the lowest rings that Vortex makes, in 30 millimeter at least, that I could find. So with that being said, yeah, I've only really got about 1/8 of an inch or so right in between there. So yeah, right around 3 millimeters. So I'm really happy with that. What we're going to do now is we're going to determine where front to back that we actually want this scope. So another thing that I want to make sure that I'm doing periodically through this process is make sure that everything is still staying level. Yes, this is clamped in here nice and tight. There's obviously little micro movements here and there that obviously we want to make sure that we take into account. So with that being said, I still see that my bubble is right on the line, which is exactly where I set it, so I know I'm good there. What we're going to do now, before I even worry about making sure it's level, I'm going to make sure that my eye relief is set. Now the way that we do that is we set the scope just basically on the rings, and we slide it forward and back until it's actually comfortable for where we would want to normally shoulder the rifle. So thankfully my daughter and I are pretty similar, and I can tell you right now this is just a little bit close. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to pick it up, slide it forward just a little bit, and I could probably go forward a little bit more with it yet. Now the other thing, you want to make sure that you're usually on one of the lower powers. I like to stay right around 6, and that way that's about where you're going to be shooting it most of the time. It's never going to be 100% perfect, you know, throughout your entire range, at least most likely, with what I consider mid-tier scopes. So what we're going to do is we're just, again, going to shoulder it, get pretty close, move forward and back just a little bit. Yeah, that's getting a lot better, but I think we can go forward just a little bit more with it yet. That, I think, is pretty much perfect. So what we can do now is we go back. Now that we know where our eye relief is actually set on the scope, what I'm going to do is take my original bubble level here, set it on the top turret. Now that top turret is obviously going to be parallel with my horizontal crosshair in there. So now all I got to do is rotate this until that bubble is exactly the same as the front. So I'm going to go ahead and do that here. Take your time, it may take you a second to do it. And again, just compare the front bubble to the back bubble and make sure that everything is about as close as you can comfortably make it. I'm going to push that scope down into those rings, make sure that it is set. Rotate it just a little bit more here. I think that is probably good. Yep, I'm kind of referencing through here also, eyeballing as well, making sure that it feels level. Make sure that the bottom of those crosshairs are actually lined up with what appears to be the center of the action. So could you eyeball it? Yes. If you have the extra money and the time and the means to get this set up, highly recommend it. It'll save me a lot of time, especially once you get to the range, you're like, something doesn't quite feel right. Not having to readjust scopes on the range. Also, because we know that we're perfectly plumb and level with the crosshairs, when we actually have it tick down, we know it's actually a quarter MOA or 10th MILRAD or whatever we want it to be, you know, whatever our scope is set up for, rather than having to worry about the trigonometry of if that's off kilter just a little bit. So again, I'm comfortable with this right here. So what I'm going to do now is grab my top cap, and since it's not hurting anything, I'm going to go ahead and just leave these levels on there. Again, I don't want to put any more force on anything that I don't absolutely have to through this process. So all I'm going to do is just kind of snug these down just a little bit. Now, while I'm still just inserting these 4 screws onto each cap, I'm putting no torque on these whatsoever. I'm not trying to clamp down or anything like that. All I'm trying to do is insert these screws, and then as soon as I start to feel any bit of resistance, I'm going to stop. Now, the other thing I'm doing is installing these in a cross pattern. So the first one I put in was my front left. Second one is rear right. Next one is going to be front right. And then my last one will be rear left. And what that does is that applies any little bit of torque that I do have in there. I'm going to be putting that in a star pattern, just like you would, say, tighten up your lug nuts on your car. That way just everything's nice and even. You don't have to worry about something binding up on you on accident. Another thing I'm going to look for is the gaps on the side. Okay, right now this cap is actually tilted back towards me just a little bit. Now once I actually clamp down on everything, that gap may go away, but it's just something that I at least want to pay attention to while I'm doing this. So I'm going to grab my second cap. Now these caps, I did pay attention. The top cap went to, or the front cap went to the front ring base. the rear cap is going to the rear ring base. I do not believe that the Pro Series from Vortex is like a matched ring set. I don't know that for a fact. Don't quote me on it. Vortex, please don't beat me up. Feel free to comment if I'm doing something wrong here. But with that being said, just in case they are, I want to make sure that I'm doing this the best that I possibly can and I'm not screwing something up. Now, the quote-unquote ideal way to do this, if you have any hesitation to believe that these are good enough rings or, you know, great rings, you can go through and lap them. Now, I do have a lapping kit available. I'm not going to worry about it on these. It's a $300 gun and I'm putting a $700 scope on it. At the end of the day, I know that this scope is probably going to be able to outperform the gun. But with that being said, I'm comfortable that Vortex made the rings, Vortex made the scope. They're both quality pieces. I'm just going to go with it and see. Now, if I have any inconsistencies later on, I might pull it off and redo something, but this scope has served me excellent in the past. I have no hesitation to believe it's going to continue to do so. So now that these are all kind of torqued down, sorry, not torqued down, just kind of snugged up a little bit, now I can go through. I'm going to set my torque wrench back down to 18 because that is what Vortex is calling for. I'm going to set this back down to 18. We're good there. Just again to double check. That bubble's good. That bubble's good. And again, I'm just going to go in the star pattern. I'm going to torque these down just a little bit and then kind of slowly work my way up. Now, the other thing I'm doing is tightening the front and the back kind of at the same time. I'm not torquing down just one screw and then working on to the next one. We're going to slowly kind of bring everything together. So I'm comfortable with that. Once again, just double checking my levels. Good there, good up front. So I'm going to go ahead and remove these, put those back in the case there. And so now, go ahead and pull this out. Down it. Oh yeah, that is much more clear, much more comfortable. Obviously much higher power than what the Gamo was. Another thing to check for on all these, obviously I didn't have a whole lot of concern for it before, but just making sure that your action can actually cycle with the new scope attached. I know sometimes that's a concern on this rifle. Again, I really wasn't concerned about it whatsoever. But just kind of give you guys an idea of the difference, let me try to get the camera set up. I'll show you guys the differences as to why I chose this scope over the Gamo. Believe it or not, anywhere from a $30 scope up to $600–700 is kind of an upgrade. So stick around and I will show you guys that in just a second. So if you're doing true target shooting and you understand how to work your optic, then a simple duplex works great. You know, you don't really need a busy reticle by any means in order to get the job done. Now, with that being said, though, if you're trying to make quick adjustments on the fly, you know, you're trying to hit small game, you miss real quick, and you just want to try and take that second shot, Kentucky windage is a great thing, and you can't really do that with the duplex very easily. So with that being said, that's one reason that I didn't like the scope. The other one, and it's a little bit easier to see under high magnification. This is all the way down on 3 power right now. It is a very fuzzy slash, I guess there's halo around a lot of objects in the scope. So let me try to crank it up to higher power and see what we can find there. Now, being a cheaper scope, this is what they have as known as fixed parallax. Now, I don't want to say there's nothing wrong with that. It's a cheaper way to obviously manufacture a scope. There's been a lot of times where scopes have gotten away with it in the past, and you know, it's worked fine in a lot of situations. However, for what I want to be able to do, it's not okay. So that's another big reason. I don't know, I'll be honest, I'm looking at this through a tiny little screen. I can't tell if you guys can really see, but I believe that's the top of the fence line right there. There is a bit of halo that goes around a lot of these objects. Now, when I took this thing out 150, 200 yards, the targets were extremely fuzzy. Let's try to compare that to the Strike Eagle, and hopefully you guys can see a little bit better as to why I switched scopes. Hopefully you guys can see the reticle a little bit better in this one. This is a second focal plane optic, meaning no matter what the magnification is, the reticle stays the same. Similar to the duplex, but obviously there's a lot more to this. So with this reticle, I'm able to perform Kentucky windage a lot easier, and that was obviously a big reasoning for it. The other thing, and probably the number one reason, is that hopefully you guys can see this is a much more clear image. When it comes to optics, you get what you pay for. This is, like I said, $600–700 scope, somewhere in there. It's a couple years since I bought it. I think it's actually discontinued now from Vortex. They do have other Strike Eagles, just not this one in particular. It is also illuminated. That's obviously full light outside, fully illuminated. That'll show you what's actually illuminated. So there are 11 settings on it, obviously battery powered. I'm sorry, 12 settings including off, which is 0. That is the brightest setting. That's kind of nice in certain situations, obviously a lower light. I'm not doing a whole lot of low light shooting at this point, but it's nice to know that it is an option. Another big reason for going to this is obviously 3/18, so literally double the magnification of what the 3/9 was. And it also has parallax adjustment. So I won't go into parallax adjustment on this particular video, but just be aware it does make a huge difference. Again, just it's a much nicer scope, and just want to upgrade to it. So had it laying around, figured it was time to try and do something a little bit nicer on this rifle, so that's what we did. So thanks for sticking around, guys. Really appreciate it. As always, hopefully this brought you guys some value. Hopefully it helped explain a couple things to you. If you guys have any questions, comments, concerns, as always, let me know. Please comment, subscribe, share, like. Really helps us out on the channel. Doesn't cost you guys anything, and it, like I said, it really helps us out. So anyway, we got plenty more videos coming up, so stick around. A lot of cool stuff. We finally got the 50 sighted in, which was awesome to say the least, and we got a lot more stuff coming up on that soon. So anyway, as always, thanks guys, appreciate it.